Hello, and welcome to this presentation about my self-designed summer research project in the philosophy of mind. I'll be discussing how we understand other people's minds in our everyday social interactions. I'll be focusing on the role of expressions. To begin, I would like to ask all of you a few questions. How do we know if a computer has a mind? How do we know whether non-human animals have minds? How do we know if a newborn baby has a mind? How can we know about others' minds? All these questions fall under the umbrella of a curious problem in the philosophy of mind known as the problem of other minds. These are some of the questions that got me interested in thinking about this topic. The last question is what I have been researching this summer, and it is what I would like to discuss with you today. There is an epistemic asymmetry. The way I know about my own mind is different than the way I know about others' minds. Our access to our own minds is often direct and immediate. By experiencing pain, I know that I'm in pain. But the way you know about my pain is different. You can hear me shout, ouch, and see me wince, but you can't experience my pain directly. What is the source of our knowledge of other minds? Before I explain the role of expression, I will give a quick overview of two answers to this question that philosophers have been discussing for a century. The first hypothesis is that we perceive others' minds just like we perceive ordinary objects, like apples and trees. The second hypothesis is that we gather evidence and infer what others are thinking and feeling. Here we have the perceptual hypothesis. We come to know others' minds by perceiving their mental states directly. On this view, your mental life is not internal and private to you. On the contrary, your thoughts and feelings are directly perceptible to others. According to this hypothesis, our knowledge of others' minds is direct in the literal sense, such that we can sometimes perceive others' mental states without any intermediaries. What motivations might we have for accepting this hypothesis? Here's an example. We may be motivated to accept this hypothesis because it is a quick and easy fix to the epistemic problem of other minds. If we can perceive others' minds, the epistemic asymmetry disappears because we can share others' experiences. So here's the example. A mother looks at her child and she sees, without conscious deliberation, that her child is joyful. She literally sees her child's joy. This example demonstrates how our knowledge of others' emotions is sometimes instant and effortless. What makes this hypothesis counterintuitive? There appears to be some perceptual distance between us and each other's emotions. That is, the claim that we can see others' minds directly is what's controversial. Here's a counterexample. A mother does not see her child's joy. Rather, she is aware of her child's expression of joy. She sees her child skipping, laughing, and grinning. There is still a layer of perceptual distance between a mother and her child's mind. We see others' emotions in their expressions. Here we have the evidential hypothesis. Others' minds are not directly perceptible, so we must come to know about other minds through inference. In our everyday social interactions, we gather evidence by observing behaviors and hearing testimonies and arrive at reasonable conclusions about others' mental states. A conclusion drawn from inference, however probable it may be, is fallible, so evidential knowledge falls short of certainty. What makes this hypothesis intuitive? Other minds are internal and hidden from view. Here's an example. A mother sees her child skipping, laughing, and grinning. She considers this evidence that her child is joyful. The emotions themselves are invisible to the mother, yet the mother is aware of her child's behaviors, and these behaviors are evidence of emotions. Based on these behaviors, the mother infers what her child must be feeling. What makes this counterintuitive? Well, it can appear to us, from a first-person point of view, that other people's thoughts and emotions are public and on display, and we can see their joy instantly without a second thought. Here's a counterexample. A mother can recognize her child's joy instantly without consciously drawing inferences. The mother does not consciously deliberate about how her child is feeling, she just knows it instinctively and intuitively. So, what is the source of our knowledge of other minds? I want to turn our attention to a new approach to the question that emphasizes the role of expression. This is the focus of my research project. The notion that we arrive at knowledge of others' minds indirectly, by way of their outward expressions, is the expressive hypothesis. Our awareness of others' expressions provides us with effortless knowledge of their mental states. Going forward, I will focus on philosopher Anil Gomes' sketch of the expressive hypothesis. Gomes' hypothesis is that our knowledge of other minds is expressive knowledge. Gomes writes, "Expressive knowledge is neither evidential nor obviously perceptual. It is a distinctive way we have of knowing about the social world, a way of knowing that involves our capacity to recognize and distinguish expressions." What makes expressive knowledge unique? Expressive knowledge is mediated, whereas perceptual knowledge is direct. Expressive knowledge does not involve conscious inferences. Here's a definition of expression. An utterance expresses a thought. A cry expresses grief or pain. A poem may express nostalgia or energy. Any action that makes public or communicates a state of mind thereby expresses it. However, a mere signal seems not to express what it signals, and a mere statement, "I feel nostalgic about the 60s, does not express nostalgia in the way that a poem does. Expression requires some concept of the action being an adequate or successful rendering of what is expressed. The key point is that an expression makes public or communicates a mental state. Thus, internal mental phenomena can be outwardly communicated. Crucially, an expression does not merely signal a mental state. Rather, the term express implies that the expression is an adequate or successful rendering of the mental state being expressed. A signal may be faulty, a sort of false alarm, whereas an expression that successfully renders an emotion entails the emotion being expressed. The expressive knowledge, or the expressive hypothesis, has its roots in the work of philosopher J.L. Austin, who wrote this. The twitch of an eyebrow provides evidence that someone is trying to keep her anger in check, say. But once she has exploded in anger, we no longer think of ourselves as having evidence, we have an expression. Evidence falls short in a way expression doesn't. Expressions are more indicative of emotions than mere behaviors, which are more ambiguous. Austin emphasized that there is a necessary relation between expressions and emotion. Expressions exist in virtue of the emotions they express. Without fear, there would be no expression of fear. In contrast, evidential knowledge is fallible because a reasonable conclusion based on behavioral evidence can nevertheless be a false conclusion. In contrast, by seeing my expression, you have proof that I'm experiencing a certain emotion. So here are the key points of Anil Gomes' view. Expressions are a unique source of knowledge about other minds. Expressive knowledge is neither perceptual nor inferential. Expressions exist in virtue of the mental states they express. We possess an expressive capacity that enables us to recognize expressions and distinguish expressions from mere behavior. So here are my research goals. I would like to explore limitations and adaptations of the theory and incorporate psychology and neuroscience. So my first goal is to evaluate the expressive hypothesis on its own terms and relative to the philosophical literature on knowledge of emotions and other minds. And my second goal is to look at how psychologists study other minds, as well as what they have to say about how we understand thoughts and emotions. I'm majoring in psychology and philosophy, so I wish to use my studies in my last year to complement each of these research programs. I intend to continue this research as a year-long interdisciplinary honors project. Okay, just to run through a few of the problems that I will be looking at. First is the case of the perfect actor. Gomes claims that expressions are necessarily tied to certain emotions and cannot occur without them, which rules out the possibility of faking them. Because it seems possible to fake them, for example, in the case of a perfect actor on stage, this is a challenge for the hypothesis. Another problem is determining how are expressions related to emotions. Gomes stipulates that it is a kind of metaphysical dependence relation, but what kind? And how do we know it's not a contingent relation? Next, what's the difference between genuine expressions and mere behavior? This will depend on what criteria we have for expressions. Finally, expressions beyond emotions. Most of the research so far has to do with expressions of emotions, but there may be other kinds of expressions that occur in virtue of other kinds of mental states, such as thoughts. All right, just wrapping it up here. I'd also like to research the expressive capacity. This may involve conducting experiments in cognitive psychology to create a computational model that describes how we recognize and distinguish expressions. It may also involve using neuroimaging technology to determine what brain processes underlie this ability. I'd also like to research how neurodivergent people understand others. For instance, I would like to review the clinical psychology and anthropology literature to learn how people with autism understand others. I'd also like to review more studies on the expression of emotion. Philosophers are still discussing research in social psychology that is somewhat outdated. So one goal I have is to bring more robust psychological research to the philosophical discussion. All right, thank you very much for tuning into my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.